Welcome in, everybody, to Sad Times, or the time where my voice gets real radio-like. It's my favorite part of the day, and I hope it's your favorite part of the day, too. My name's Kevin. For those of you who have never listened to Sad Times is a podcast and where we bring on a guest each week, and we talk about times they were upset, sad, traumatized, any number of things, and we allow that person to tell their story. And I try to get out of the way. And the goal here is not to diagnose the problem, not to solve the problem, nor to judge the problem. It's about sharing an experience that maybe somebody at home is listening and says, oh, I hear that. I feel a little less alone. I thought I was the only one who thought that. So that's the whole thing with Sad Times. This week, we've been having to bring in and out advertisers. And this week, we do have a new advertiser. The advertiser is Overly Simplistic Solutions to Complex Problems. And they said, we are here to help you with an argument you may be having with your spouse about your relationship with simple solutions. Just ask Connor from California. And Connor said, my spouse was on my case about how I didn't empty the dishwasher enough, so I called up Overly Simplistic Solutions to Complex Problems for assistance. After I got off the call, I walked right back into the kitchen and said to her, you took a vow, and left to go watch reruns of According to Jim. Thanks, Overly Simplistic Solutions to Complex Problems. Wow, it's quite a sponsor. I might actually call them up. I have a lot of complex problems that need simplistic solutions. But enough of that. Let's get to this week's guest. This is somebody I believe I've known the longest, other than when my sister was on, of guests. This is my older cousin, Jenn. Jenn, how you doing?
I'm good, Kevin. How are you?
Oh, I'm hanging in there. Where are you?
How you emphasized older.
Well, I didn't mean it that way.
That was cool.
Yeah, well, good. Well, what I meant by that is I'm the youngest of the cousins. That's all.
True. Okay. Nice walk back.
Hey, that's what they pay me for. Brent, are you paying me? Damn it. Okay. So Jenn, where are you dialing in from?
I'm dialing in from my home, which is located in downtown Washington, D.C., your nation's capital. That's
right. And you have lived in that same home since 2006, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I remember I came to visit you and your husband there when I was on my way to Richmond, Virginia, that fall of 2006. Back then, things were a little different. And, I think we should get it out of the way. Jenn, you and I went to the same prestigious college in the south of Illinois. We're not going to name it. It's just very prestigious. And what was your major in college?
Political science.
You don't say.
Yep. With a minor in museum studies.
You have a minor? I didn't even have a minor.
Yeah.
Museum studies. What kind of classes did you have to take to do that?
So this prestigious university that you and I went to, I assume that you recall that there was a sizable museum.
Mm-hmm. I do.
So there was a pretty prestigious museum studies program. So there was art history, but there was also the like curating exhibits, putting together exhibits, the research behind it. So yeah.
So do you still think about that? Like when you go to, obviously you are in a city that is lousy with museums, as they say.
Correct.
Do you think about that when you kind of are walking around maybe a Smithsonian museum or anything?
Yeah, I will tell you actually. Well, yeah, but the one that I really nerded out to, if that's a thing anymore, as you being from Illinois, you know that President Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater. And I live probably about 5 blocks north of Ford's Theater. And right across the street is where they took him after he had been shot. And you can still tour that home. And they had the bed set up, and it was the original bedding with the stains. That's
the stains?
Yeah. But anyway, I nerded out for about 30 minutes talking to the park ranger about, how did they keep that, pristine, and, how did they restore it and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, that was a long way of saying, yeah, it kind of crosses my mind from time to time.
And I love that because I think, and we're going to get into a lot about DC while we discuss today, but I come to think that maybe the best moral lessons can be found in reading history. It seems to me it tells you what's going on now by telling you about the past, right? History repeats itself, all that good stuff. So to be in a place with so much history, with so many landmarks, as I said earlier, museums, and then of course the Capitol itself, the White House, all that. I mean, that's just, you've lived in the DC area for what, 28 years? Is that right?
Well, you really are dating me. So I moved out here in 94.
Yeah, you moved there when you were 1.
Yeah, right. So I moved out here in 94 right after I graduated. And I lived for a couple of years in a suburb called Silver Spring, Maryland, which is right across the DC border.
I think I read about that in a Tom Clancy novel.
Yeah. And then when I met my husband, he was living downtown, and as our relationship progressed, I moved downtown too.
Awesome.
So I've lived downtown since 2000.
Wow. Okay, so 23 years. That's awesome. And let's just get this out of the way. You and I came up, obviously, we're from the same family. You and I came up, and I would say, I think it's fair to say, correct me if you feel differently, in a family that is more of a conservative-based political belief system. Would you say that's fair?
Yes.
And I think that it's fair to say that you have hewed more towards that type of belief, while I have gone far afield and am just a nasty liberal.
Well, that's not really a fair description, but yeah, I mean, I grew up in Southern Illinois. I was born and raised, and I went to school there. And so my level of experiencing anything beyond the small bubble I was used to was quite limited, unless we traveled to a big city or, that sort of thing. But when I moved to DC, it was obviously a culture shock. I mean, it's a different part of the country, but it was also a extremely larger, diverse population than I was used to. And I embraced it. And it was a great time in my life where I was able to think back about my upbringing and my experiences when I first moved out here. Some were able to reinforce my beliefs, and other things, I was able to come to a different conclusion on what, growing up, things were black and white.
Yep.
And moving here, I learned that there was a level of gray when it came to certain things. So it was, so I think my level of conservative thinking definitely waned the longer I moved out here.
Now it's true of DC. It's like you're it's almost like 98% Democrat registered voter or something like that. Maybe not 98.
Actually, it's probably like 99.9%.
Is that okay? So it's pretty fucking high. All right.
Well, I mean, I will, for those of you that can remember, in 1984, when Ronald Reagan won the landslide presidential election against Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale only won two areas. He won Minnesota, where he was from, and he won District of Columbia. So that kind of tells you the how large the Democratic Party is in DC.
I try to forget that landslide victory, actually. So that's fine. Anyway, the point being,
remind me to send you a picture in my Bush Reagan re-election T-shirt.
Oh, please. Wait,
yeah,
that sounds really great. I'll put that up on the wall. That sounds great. And you, having lived out there for, a while, you have been working in the political world. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. So, the main thing we're going to talk about today, as you know, is January 6th. And you're one of the first people I thought of when that was going on. And it got me to thinking. You and I have always talked a little bit of politics, and we've been cordial about it. We have different opinions, etc. And I got to thinking, okay, well, Jenn is out there and I knew you were safe, but I thought, here's somebody who's worked in government for however many years. This person knows far more about democracy than I probably do. And I don't know if I've ever picked her brain about that. And that was a overdue but real realization that I had. So, living in DC, you said 2 areas. Notice when you were talking about that time that the devil won again, you said two areas, right? So 1 state and then DC. DC is not a state, right?
You are correct. We are some of us refer to DC that live here as the last colony. But yeah, we are a district. We are not a state.
So does that mean that basically how are laws made there?
So we have what is called limited home rule, which means that we have a city council, which is elected by the residents. So think of them as kind of like a House of Representatives in a sense. So they pass laws. We have a mayor, but because we are we are over the federal government, meaning Congress, has to basically approve or disapprove of any legislation that we want to pass.
Wow. And you don't have a vote in Congress, right? You have a representative.
We do not. We have a delegate.
A delegate, excuse me. I often
she sits on committees, but she does not have a vote on the floor of the House.
Brent often refers to me as his delegate. Thank you, Brent. Okay, so obviously, in the First Amendment, one of the things is the right for peaceful protest, right? And let's think of the March on Washington in 1963, seminal moment of very positive, peaceful protest, right? And what I'm trying to say is like a lot of this comes to DC. Now, in May 2020, we're all locked down with COVID. And then there's the horrible murder of George Floyd. And did you guys have a lot of protest, violence, anything like that?
We did. So, yes, living in DC, we are basically where everybody comes to peacefully protest. That is every American's right to protest. It is just something that a DC resident gets used to, right? I mean, it's just a way of life. You get used to it. As long as it's peaceful, sometimes it gets annoying if they close a road or whatever, but I mean, it's just part of life. But to your question about the George Floyd protest, yes. So here we are, as you said, it's during COVID. We are locked in our houses. And this horrible incident happens, and people got, as everybody across the country saw it, people got pissed, and rightly so. I mean, it was disgusting what happened. And much like other cities, DC was not immune to protest, and they weren't immune to violent protest. And so we witnessed a lot of looting, a lot of fires. Personally, my neighbor lost a window in our condo building because a brick went through it.
Wow.
Across the street from my office, there's a bodega where, you go in to get your coffee or whatever. His place was completely looted. So, I mean, there was a lot that had happened during that time. And unlike other jurisdictions, and this goes back to we're not a state, another disadvantage that DC residents have is that we have a National Guard, but we, meaning the mayor and the city, cannot unilaterally call the National Guard. And so
who's able to call the National Guard then?
So it's like a chain of commands, right? Like it goes up a chain, and I'm not all too sure what it is. But I think it has to do with like people at the Pentagon, but I don't know who, like, is it the Secretary of the Army? I don't know exactly who it is. But nonetheless, up until 2020, it had never been an issue calling the National Guard when there had been civil unrest, because obviously you could see what was going on. Nor did to my knowledge, nor did any administration unilaterally just decide to send troops into DC. I could be wrong about that. But what we saw in DC as a result of the protest was then President Trump overreaching on sending in military into DC to try to control the violence that had taken place over numerous nights.
Do you mean military as in like not the National Guard, but like branches of the military, like the Army?
Correct. So there was the DC National Guard. He might have called up, sometimes, and that this happened in January 6th, but, we will rely on the National Guard from Virginia or Maryland to come in.
Mm-hmm.
But there were also helicopters that were brought in from the military. I might have sent you a video of it, but I mean, there were several military helicopters flying over the city and hovering over like pods of protesters, like dangerously close, to try to get them to disperse. And yeah, so that was, and I'm pretty sure most people remember the military force that was used they were actually peaceful protesters that cleared out a park by the White House. So
mm-hmm.
Trump could, stand across the street from a church with the Bible. So, I mean, that was...
Which he held upside down.
Correct.
Which is how I hold my Bible.
Yeah.
Right as I'm about to drop it. No, shut up, Kevin. Okay. So having lived in that area for so long, had you ever seen the military used in that way against peaceful protesters?
Against peaceful protesters, no. I had seen the military used once before, and that was the day after 9/11. So remember, I lived in downtown on 9/11 as well.
Yeah. Wow. Yep. Okay. So we're obviously getting to a point where things are a little different than they were when you moved out to that area in 94.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as I've known you, going back to kind of the political stripe thing, you have been a registered Republican. Now, is that still the case?
It is. And I actually had this argument with my husband this morning. I am, number one, it really does not matter in the District of Columbia for reasons I've already said.
Mm-hmm.
But if I did live in an area where my vote actually mattered, I would still be registered as a Republican. If anything, just to vote in a primary to make sure that a Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't advance.
That's funny. I don't
election.
Never heard that name before.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
That's a kind way of...
Yes. Oh, no. I'm sorry. That just made me think of my own vomit.
Maybe you've heard me refer to her as other things.
Yes, maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
Which comes to, we're joking, but there's real, I think, frustration behind our joking. When you went out there in the 90s, even in the early 2000s, maybe very early 2000s, maybe pre 9/11, I mean, was it as divisive as it is now? Does it have that sense?
Absolutely not. No.
Okay.
No.
And you work with lawmakers.
Correct.
And so you're like where the sausage is being made, all that, right? And
yes.
Do you feel that whatever the divisiveness that maybe out on the street, one person yelling at another person, are you seeing that transfer over into the halls of Congress as well, where it's not as cordial or
yeah. And I don't think you need to have my position to walk the halls of Congress to see that. I mean, I think you just need to watch the nightly news and just see the rhetoric that's being thrown between the two sides. It's quickly becoming a broken system to which nothing is going to happen. So,
do you think we've become used to it already? We're inured to it, or do you think there's a way that we could change it?
I'm always hopeful, right? I mean, that's part of my upbringing is, I believe in democracy and I believe in this country, and I'm always optimistic. And I was very optimistic after the midterm elections when, the Republicans did not win the seats that they were supposed to win. And a lot of these election deniers didn't win. And it was just, it was comforting to know that a lot of Americans are basically fed up with this bullshit and they didn't want it to continue. So I'm always hopeful that we can turn it around.
That's good. I try to be hopeful too, and then I watch the Cubs, and then I become less hopeful.
Well, Kevin, you and I could have another hour talking about our.
That'll be the real sad times right there.
Yeah, for sure. Right.
Our grandmother, God rest her soul, wonderful woman, and huge Cubs fan, taught me everything I know about baseball. I love that woman. Okay, so let's get to then January 6th. Okay. There was that tweet that former President Trump sent in December about we're going to do this thing, will be wild. So what was kind of the buzz around the city leading up to January 6th, and what was your expectation of what may or may not happen?
So we actually we had an idea of the lead up to this in DC because Trump had held rallies in DC from the period between the election and January 6th, right? There was this long stretch of he started with the rhetoric that the election was stolen, and his patriots came into town several times during that period. One particular time, there was it also got violent because there were Proud Boys that were in town that got in fights with locals, and there was destruction of property again. So
can I, sorry to interrupt you, real fast question. When you say got in fights with locals, like they're just yelling at them or physical fights?
I mean, so DC is, we're not too rowdy, but we're very proud of our city and don't fuck with it kind of thing. And,
right.
kind of tired of the bullshit that we were living with, as I always called the president as our neighbor, because he literally lives right down the street.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like, the election happened and it was like everybody in DC was collectively breathing a sigh of relief of like, that shitty neighbor you've had for a couple of years has finally fucking decided to move. And so then you have this, this lead up to it where he's ginning up these people. And so there were a couple of weekends that he had these patriots in town and they caused havoc. And there would be like skirmishes, with locals, that were walking and, maybe a local said something that didn't set right and, that sort of thing. But yeah, so when he did release that tweet, it was a little unnerving because my mind immediately went to knowing what January 6th was, which is when they certify the election, and knowing that that was going to be his last chance to do, to change
right.
the results.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but never believing what happened on January 6th would happen. But I mean, it's set in the back of my mind that, oh, great, we're going to have these people here again, and they're going to cause problems, and great. And so as the time came closer, we as DC residents were advised, if you're not working from home, you should probably work from home that day, and do not engage with people that are supportive of Trump and his efforts. It was just kind of like let's just not make the situation worse.
Kind of like it's almost like kind of don't just ignore it as best you can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that sort of thing. Let the police do what they need to do, sort of thing. And so, so here I am on January 6th. My husband and I are working from home, which thankfully didn't happen a lot during COVID because we would definitely be divorced at this point. So he was working from home that day. And he is mildly political. And as you know, Kevin, I'm a political geek. So I'm, watching
right.
The House and the Senate proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in the den doing work, and I'm watching I should back up, and I'm sorry to kind of jump around.
No,
But
you're good.
as you know, I exercise every morning, right? And so
Yes.
my route is the National Mall. And the day before is when I noticed, oh, great, there might be a lot of people here for this. When there was a semi parked on one of the streets that had it was like a store of like Trump gear that had started unloading, and I was like, oh, okay, well, this might not be good.
Like they were going to
And
sell it out of, or the truck had Trump gear that was going to be sold.
yeah, for sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you'd go a couple more blocks, and there'd be another stand, and you're just like, and then you'd see like more and more the red MAGA hats, people wearing them, and you're like, oh, okay. And then so you're just kind of like, okay, still not thinking that January 6th was going to be what it was. And so here I am on January 6th, and I'm working, but I'm also mindful of the TV, and I'm watching the proceedings. And I think I told you, like, they've got the proceedings on the big screen, and over the corner, it's the coverage of the protest or Trump's speech.
Right.
And out of nowhere, the smaller picture is now the bigger picture, where they're now covering the protest. And I'm watching it, and I'm watching the people rushing the grounds of the Capitol. And then that's when the mayhem ensued. And I go in and I talk to my husband, who knows that I can be a little hysterical on things, and a little anxious, have a little anxiety. And he's like, just calm down. It's not that big of a deal. This is DC. The police know how to deal with it. And I'm like, no.
So can I ask you, Jen, when you went in there, so as somebody who not only walks the mall every morning, but also is on Capitol Hill often, what were the thoughts that you were having as you saw on your screen the small picture, now the big picture, of people basically barging's not right, but breaking over barricades, all that stuff? Like, what were you thinking?
I was thinking that this was not your typical protest.
Right.
But at that point, I still didn't think that it would get to the point that it got to. And so as I'm continuing to watch this, and the procedures are still going on both chambers, and then all of a sudden you see, the leaders are being taken out quickly, and then you're seeing people that are funneling through windows. And that's when I went in and I told my husband, this is something very fucking serious. And so we were watching it just completely flabbergasted. And I don't know if I told you this or not, but because 2020 had been so challenging, not going to lie, the alcohol consumption was a bit brisk in 2020.
Yes.
So my
brisk
husband
is
and
a
I
good way to put it.
Yeah. So my husband and I decided that we were going to do a dry January.
Okay.
Always been a goal. We were going to try to do it, try to, air out the liver for the month.
Sure.
And then, we made it until noon on January 6th. At that point, my husband was like, open up the wine. So we're sitting here watching this in just total disbelief. And then I start thinking about all of the staff members that I work with, that I not only work with, but they've become friends. So there was a concern that what's happening to them? Where are they? Are they okay? Are they in harm's way? And so I reached out to several members of either a congressman, congresswoman, or a senator. Just, are you okay? Are you okay? Now, granted, because it was COVID, there was a limited number of staff people that were there that day. However, there were several of my friends that were up there that were barricaded in their offices, that were scared. One in particular was texting me back saying that he was hiding underneath a desk. So it was scary, and it was thankfully none of them were harmed. But I mean, nonetheless, there was a real fear for people that I know and care for as friends, not just colleagues, but I was concerned for their well-being.
And these people that you were emailing, your friends and colleagues, could they hear people in the Capitol, like going through?
It never got to that level of questioning because I didn't want to.
Yeah, you didn't want to bombard them.
I didn't want to bombard them.
Yeah.
My goal was just to check in to make sure that they were okay. And once that was, confirmed, then I just kind of let it be.
Now,
but I mean, I have talked to a friend of mine who was up there and said that she was really fearful that it might be the last day
of her life.
I mean, there was that sense of fear. What are these people going to do? So,
jeez. And again, you studied poli-sci. You referred to yourself a few minutes ago as a political geek. I've always known you to be a lover of politics, and unfortunately, you just have that Reagan shirt. But what is going through your head in the sense that, okay, I know that my friends and colleagues, at least at this moment, are okay, but what about that building?
Right.
And like, what are you thinking then?
So it was morally devastating for me. I mean, it's not just because I am, I work here, I live here, this is my home, but it's also a appreciation and true understanding of what that building is and what that building means to this country. It's the people's house. And to see it ambushed like that, and it was just, and it still is, it's devastating, and it still bothers me today to watch. I get very upset when I see any pictures or videos from that day, because it takes me back to just a really bad place.
And I mean, how long was it until you could do your walk on the mall again? Were you able to do it the next day, or was security?
So I have a very good girlfriend who is also in government affairs, and she lives on Capitol Hill.
Okay.
And so she and I are known to go for long walks and just bullshit. And so we texted each other that morning and said, let's just get out and let's go for a walk and kind of, And so I went to meet her on Pennsylvania Avenue. And as I'm walking down, I'm literally still in my neighborhood, and there are still Trump supporters with their MAGA hats, and they're wearing the American flags around their shoulders. And it was just another, I can't believe the audacity of this. And so, just like they had done absolutely, like what they did was not only acceptable, it was justified. It was unbelievable. And so when I met my
friend, they were proud.
Oh yeah, they were absolutely proud.
Okay.
Clearly, they were still wearing the MAGA stuff.
Yeah.
And walking around and, high-fiving each other. And so my friend and I actually walked down to the Capitol grounds just to see how it looked, just to make, and it was still standing, which is the most important thing. And so.
Yeah. And, you say, sorry, you have said that it's really hard for you to see videos from that day, but then starting at the beginning of the summer of 2022, there was the congressional subcommittee, and there were hearings, and if not all of them, I'd say most of them, I was able to watch, and you and I texted back and forth during it.
Correct.
And I don't know about you, but I started watching that, and I was just blown away. I was blown away by what appeared to be the inaction, I guess I'll say, the inaction. So as somebody who works in, with the government, who loves democracy, who has always been a political geek, what were you thinking when you were watching these hearings, and what were your big takeaways?
Well, I mean, there were so many things. I mean, each hearing brought something new to light, and each thing was more troublesome. I mean, before they really started the hearings, I don't know if you recall, they had the police officers that were witnesses.
The Capitol police officers?
So that's another problem that we had on January 6th, and it goes back to DC not being a state. So the initial response, obviously, on January 6th, the Capitol Police, clearly they were the first line of defense. That's their territory. And then when they were overcome very quickly, it was the DC Metropolitan Police that went up to provide assistance. And those men and women fought for hours while we were begging as a city, the mayor, we were begging, even congressional leaders were begging the Pentagon, the police, and the National Guard, this has got to stop. And they waited, how many hours did they determine that they waited until they were finally given the okay to come in to help?
I don't recall, but a lot.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's an interesting, and not to kind of, I feel like I'm going all over the place here, but I mean, that's a great comparison of this is disparity between the Trump years here in DC, when you looked at what happened during the George Floyd and the mass, just overzealous, just too much military. The response was just ridiculous versus what happened on January 6th, which was nothing. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty telling.
Yeah, I mean, that is quite, yes, those two things put side by side, it really brings it into a stark perspective.
Right.
So you're watching this now. I do this thing. So I live in Chicago, and every once in a while, good old Chicago will be featured in something, right? We're just still trying to be New York. Although I did just hear Bruce McCulloch say, Chicago is the city that New York thinks it is. And that made me really happy.
Oh, nice.
But I'll see parts of Chicago. And I was like, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. How surreal was it for you living in downtown DC? How many blocks are you from the Capitol?
6.
6 blocks. Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. How surreal was it as you're watching this testimony? They're talking about parts of the town that you live in.
Right. So there was one hearing in particular, and it was the hearing where they were talking about the day of they were talking about the day. And Trump was delivering his speech, and he got in the car demanding to go up to the Capitol. And he was told by his Secret Service agents that was just not going to happen. But they had predetermined a route to take him up to the Capitol, which would have been 2 blocks south of where I live. And so when I'm hearing the cross streets on the congressional hearing, I was like, oh, shit, that was really close.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
And I have to imagine the same way that you said earlier that you guys get, oh, well, it's DC, we're used to protest. You must, at this point, be used to motorcades too, right?
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, living in DC, it is not uncommon to be stopped, even as a pedestrian, because of a motorcade. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we're used to protests, we're used to motorcades, but the idea that on January 6th, there could have potentially been a motorcade of the president driving 2 blocks south of my house to go up to the Cap. It was a little unnerving. So,
yeah, I'd say so. So. Which, Brent, take a note here. We need to get a motorcade. Okay, thank you. So you're hearing all these streets that are 2 blocks away from you. Obviously, you're 6 blocks away from the Capitol building, which it stands as a symbol of so much. And I remember in that 2006 visit, Jen, when I visited you and your husband, we were on your rooftop of your condo building. Mm-hmm. And I said, I was like, hey, I don't understand why there aren't any tall buildings. And you're like, hey, dipshit. It's because nothing could be taller than the Capitol. And I think that was the first time I'd heard that. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So the reverence is all the way down to the architecture, right?
True. Very true. They don't want to lose the skyline.
Mm-hmm.
being dwarfed by big buildings.
And so we go to these hearings. We're watching these hearings, and then all of a sudden, it seemed to be like women were coming out to tell the story, and kind of the story that I suppose I'll speak for myself. I always assumed was something was going on weird, but maybe not. How did you feel watching that as these women came forward and told that story?
Well, I don't think pride is the right word for it, but a true appreciation. And I've always believed that women are the stronger sex. So leave it to women to,
I tend to believe, I tend to agree with that.
To be the truth in what happened when you had all of these men who, even today, continue to protect Trump in what happened that day.
Mm-hmm. So,
but you even look at like somebody like Congressman Liz Cheney, who I know you don't particularly care for policy wise, but I think you can appreciate what she did.
Most certainly, yes.
Right.
So you're watching the hearings. I want to go back a little bit? Like after January 6th, just a reminder to everybody, that was exactly 2 weeks to the day before the inauguration of President Biden.
Right.
So what was it like in that city for 2 weeks between January 6th and the inauguration?
So knowing we were going to have this conversation, I double checked it, but on the day of the inauguration, we had 26,000 troops in the streets of DC. And so,
wow.
Given the proximity of where my husband and I live, our street is a well-known street, and we live on the north side of the street, but the south side of the street was what was in the red zone, which meant that there was no traffic, very limited pedestrian traffic. Residents were advised to carry their IDs with them at all times to prove where they lived. But every intersection had it had a military vehicle of some sort, whether it was a tank or a Jeep. And then there were, as I said, 26,000 men and women in our streets, armed.
I'm trying to picture that.
Well, it was well documented. If you just do a Google search.
Well, I guess what I mean by, I'm sorry.
But this is the thing that troubles me is, and I know that I take this particular time period around January 6th and the inauguration a little bit more. It's more sensitive to me than most. One, because of my job, and two, because of where I live. But I often wonder, for those that weren't here or didn't witness it in live, I don't think that it hits like it hits people that live here. Because you're so far removed. You perhaps don't know the buildings or the streets. It maybe some people look at it as like it was just so surreal. And so it bothers me when people don't appreciate or understand how horrible that day was. And hearing people that are interviewed and they try to whitewash it, or they try to, blow over it because, get over it type of thing. It's just, it's really upsetting.
Yeah. And I believe that, was it the RNC who came out at some point and called it, quote, legitimate political discourse?
Yeah. Among other things. But yeah. Because it happened in DC, this is where the people that are being charged are being, this is where their court is. And so a lot of people are being held in the DC jail, which I'm not going to pretend is a nice place to go, but every night in DC, there are J6 sympathizers that are standing in vigil outside the DC jail. And I'm just, it's
with like signs and stuff, like a quiet
with
protest.
Candles and signs, and they're political prisoners and they need to be released. And so
how do you and then somebody you mentioned earlier who I'd never heard of, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I heard that she went to visit the prisoners or something.
Oh, yeah. So that was a couple of weeks ago. So, yeah, that's another great thing with this current House of Representatives is some of these election deniers are now placed on prominent committees of jurisdiction. And one of them is oversight, of which Marjorie Taylor Greene is a member. And she has been a long critic of how these people have been treated. And so, yeah, she demanded from our mayor to take a tour of the DC jail to visit the prisoners, to check in, to make sure that their iPads were working correctly, I suppose.
Hey, Brent, could you pull that dictionary off the shelf there? Can you just, grandstanding, can you just look that up for me? Okay, cool. Okay, so, and you just said something we haven't really talked about, which is election deniers. And as... Again, all of this shit that has happened has made me, and I think it's true of a lot of people, appreciate more of what we have, right? Because you're about to lose it. As somebody who's worked with elected representatives for a long time, how does that compute in your head, election denialism?
I don't understand it. I really, I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to understand it. This is a place that I've never thought I will tell you another thing that has really bothered me about this as somebody that has lived here, on September 11th, and then somebody that lived here on January 6th, is the response from the American people. So on November 11th, the entire country was completely united. You couldn't walk 2 feet without seeing an American flag. We were all patriotic. We were proud Americans. And then you look at January 6th and something like that you think would cause the American people to wake up and go, this is some fucked up shit. Mm-hmm. It was more of we were just as divided. And I think what bothers me is the fact that those were American citizens that did that on January 6th. And the fact that there was one individual that was able to convince these people of a lie. It's just, I don't know how to explain it. I just don't understand how we got to this point and how it still continues.
Well, I would invite our listeners or anybody to Google narcissistic personality disorder. That could be one reason.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Kevin, for the first time, since the 1800s, there were people that stormed the United States Capitol.
Right.
And in the midst of it, there was a man carrying a Confederate flag. Mm-hmm. How does that happen? How did we get here?
Propaganda works is the one of the simple answers that is actually very complex, and also, you hear it a lot, but it's true. Why our system is so wonderful, stellar, whatever you want to call it. One of the main reasons is the peaceful transfer of power. I lost, you won. I'm going to be at your inauguration, and we're going to just pass it on, and away we go. It sounds like, Jen, that this was pretty traumatic for you.
It still is.
And why do you think it's still? Tell me why you think it still is.
Because it's still going on, right? I mean, it's still happening. you've still got, even in the midterms, you had election deniers, and I'm fearful for what's going to happen in 24. Does Trump get the nomination? If he does he win? I don't think so, but I didn't think he was going to win in 2016. So, I mean, it's just a sad state of it. I mean, it's incredibly sad, because for a long time I had my dream jobs, and I still do. I still walk through the halls of Congress with a sense of pride and just an appreciation of what I'm able to do and who I'm able to talk to. And just walking down a hallway, realizing the footsteps that have been there before me. I recognize all of that and I appreciate it. But I also have to wonder, how long is it going to last? And it's upsetting.
It's something that you probably never... Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, it's somebody asked me the other day how DC was, and I was like, DC is predictably unpredictable at this point. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
But so. I imagine when you moved out there to start working in the political arena and all the time, you never thought this. You didn't imagine something like this would occur.
No, I don't think anybody ever thought something like this would occur. Did you ever think growing up? You don't have to be a political junkie, but did you ever think that you would at some point in time see a group of Americans ransack the Capitol because they were pissed off that their man didn't win an election?
No, absolutely not. Now, yeah. They may ransack like a fast food restaurant for a chicken sandwich or something. But
sure.
Yeah. That's just America, but not not the Capitol.
Right.
So you have your colleagues who work on the Hill. How, and I know you're not speaking for anybody else, but like, is there still a sense of traumatic or dread for people who are working there, or have people been able to move past it even if they feel a sense that the overarching problem is still there?
I'm not going to pretend or even guess what other people are thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, I can speak for myself that the first time that I went into the rotunda after this all happened, I had to stop for a minute to take it in. Or anytime you go into a congressional building, you have to go through a metal detector, and you look at the men and women that are Capitol Hill police, and you just look at them with a different type of respect for what they went through. Or even when I'm walking down the street and I see a DC police officer, I mean, there's that recognition of thank you.
Yeah. Jenn, again, I've learned in the last couple of years, I always say I'm the kid who perpetually has to touch the stove to learn that it's hot. And this has been kind of that version of that a little bit for America. But what I've learned is more about democracy and what democracy actually means. It's not what I learned in civics class, although that is part of it. But it's having conversations exactly like you and I are having right now. I think that is the backbone of this, that and a free and impartial media, but we're not going to get into that.
But I will say, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that that's what we are missing, is our inability to talk to each other, right? Is we just seem to be painted on squarely on opposite sides with the inability to talk to the other person. And I know that I'm just as guilty as anybody of that. Last year I refused to go to my high school reunion because I knew I was going to run into people that this would just be an issue, and I just did not want to deal with it. Or if I've had run-ins with people wearing MAGA hats in DC, which probably wasn't the smartest thing, but there's that inability. I just shut down when I know that there is that other side that I just am convinced that they cannot be swayed. And I think that that's the problem, is we've lost that inability of having, much like you and I used to have, Kevin, and we still do, which is that thoughtful consideration of other people's beliefs. You might not agree, but you don't have to be angry and combative about it either. And if anything, I hope that at some point we're able to return back to a time when we can have thoughtful conversations. The word compromise isn't filthy, and we can just get along.
Man, it's so true. And you know better than most. Governance does not happen without compromise. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
but there isn't any.
Right, exactly. So governance is not necessarily happening. They're
lucky if they can get the bare minimum done at this point.
Could you just talk to them about them naming a post office after me and Brent? Please.
I
love post offices.
Maybe.
I was at once a stamp collector briefly. Philologist. Were you really?
Yeah.
I said that wrong. You know who else was? FDR.
Right. Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
I believe
Kevin,
so.
We were having such a nice discussion. We don't need to take it back to FDR because then I'll start throwing out Reagan and then,
Oh, I know. Oh, God. Oh, sweet Jesus. And now for hour number 2.
Don't let me bring up Margaret Thatcher.
Don't you fucking bring up Margaret Thatcher. And now for hour number 2, Jenn and Kevin scream at each other about the New Deal.
And then we hug it out at the end.
Because that's what you're supposed to do. You can have emotions, You can have passion about stuff. But at the end of the day, you are my cousin. You're one of my favorite people. You're somebody that no matter if we disagree 100 years from now on politics, that doesn't matter about our relationship. And I think that is something that, to what you were saying, is kind of missing.
Yeah, I think we just all need to recognize that we're human beings. And we all have to share this earth and this country, and let's just be a little considerate of other people.
Yeah. As we wrap up, Jenn, is there anything else? I know we covered a lot today, and I know you said a lot of wise things, but is there anything else that you wanted to kind of share with everybody before we kind of wrap up?
Just make sure you register to vote.
Yeah. A quick story about Jenn. The primaries, or the original election for the mayor of Chicago happened a couple months ago. And I got a text from Jenn, who are you voting for? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I've never voted for mayor in Chicago. And Jenn, rightfully so, gave me some shit about that. And so when we had our runoff, I did a little research, and then I went and voted, and I felt much better for it. And so I thank you for that, Jenn.
Absolutely. I'm very glad that you made your voice heard. In the end, that's what it's about, right? That's democracy.
That's a big part of it. That's for damn sure.
Yeah. And your guy won. So there you go.
Yeah, damn right he did. Yay, Brandon Johnson. It might
have been that one vote, Kevin. It might have been that one vote that set him over the edge. I don't think so.
It might have. I mean, this isn't the 1876. Okay, I'm going to go with it.
Yeah.
Brent, get me a parade. God damn it. I want ticker tape. Okay.
I want a Ferris Bueller type parade for you.
Oh, well, as long as I can sing the Beatles, you're damn right.
Oh God, no. That's the third podcast one.
Oh, she doesn't.
We'll have the Reagan versus FDR, and then the next one we will do the Beatles and how much they sucked. At least one.
It still sucks, technically, I think, right?
Hey, shut up, Brent. Shut up. Jenn?
Yeah.
You be quiet too.
I will.
I'm just kidding. Jenn, thank you so much for taking the time,
Absolutely.
sharing, I think, a very singular story that most people would not have heard if you did not have the time and generosity to come out and tell your story. I really, really appreciate it. It is certainly a seminal day for probably all the wrong reasons in American history. And you are somebody, as I said, who I respect very much, who understands a lot about democracy in ways that I never have. And I just look up to you for living your values as you believe them to be. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Well, Kevin, thank you for giving me the space to share my thoughts on it. And I will just close on my end with something that you said earlier this hour, which was we learn from history.
Yes.
Right. So if we don't continue to talk about it, it might happen again. So
true. So true. And I will just end with the same thing that I always do. Jenn just said, we're all trying to share this earth together. We're all human beings, which means we fuck up all the time. Just remember there's always room for kindness and grace, especially where I forget when it's with yourself. So just remember, there's always room for kindness and grace. Jenn, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. It's always good to talk to you.
And you. And we'll see everybody next time on Sad Times.
You've been listening to a Fourth Hand Joint.